Hi everyone, I'm Simon from ARC and I'd like to welcome you to the walkthrough video for our Supported Living Cost Toolkit. This was developed earlier this year and licensed to the LGA through Partners in Care and Health and is available for use by local authority, commissioners and providers of supported living in England. It's a recording of a live webinar we held in May 2024, so there will be some Q&A in the middle as well. Please do refer to the timestamps in the description below. If you have any technical questions that aren't answered here, our support mailbox is available and the details are in the description below. We hope you enjoy. Just in terms of who are we, so we're ARC Consulting. We've been around since 2016, so we've been doing this as our own consulting organisation for a good, what's that? Oh God, that's like 8-9 years now, isn't it, John? That we've had ARC. Before that, we were, John was an ex-commissioner, he's my business partner, he was an ex-commissioner of adult social services and public health. And we've both been in consulting roles. We've also run and managed an outsourced social care services organisation as well. I myself was a commercial manager of a domiciliary care organisation for a while before that as well. So we've been around the space in kind of adult social care and health and related areas for quite a while. And in terms of our kind of general day-to-day business, we do consulting with quite a lot of authorities in the UK, but also we do quite a bit of work with the LGA and ADAS on national things like this supported living toolkit that we're going through today. We did quite a lot of work with the cost of care, DHSC fair cost of care exercises a couple of years ago, and before and after that we've done quite a bit. But just to give you a little sense of where we've been pretty much everywhere in the country that you could, all corners of the country, as much as possible. And here's some of our clients as well. Okay, so yeah, so we've probably worked with about a third of all local authorities in England, doing something in the realm of commissioning, strategic commissioning, operational commissioning, cost of care, adult social care. In terms of today's session, I'll do a demo of the toolkit, so hopefully everyone's here to have a look at it. We'll walk through how it works and everything, and there'll be lots of questions, I'm sure. So we'll make sure that there's space and time for all of that in the next 2 hours. In terms of why we built it and why we developed it, we developed the home care cost of care toolkit a couple of years ago, which was used in the DHSC's fair cost of care exercise. So that was published by the LGA. It was on our website. I'll show you to our website in a second if you've not already been on it. That's still available. It's free to use for all councils. We've always had a desire to kind of do that for different markets, other markets as well. So the next version that we then started working on immediately from that really was supported living, and obviously that's now been published. That's been on our website since the end of March now. So we've been doing updates and things to it as well. But really the aim was allow commissioners and providers to do all of the things that they're required to do in terms of understanding market fee rates, understanding costs, looking at individual placements, looking at cost breakdowns, monitoring from a market level and an individual placement level those costs, and really understanding what that means in terms of delivering that personal care and support under supported living provision. So we focused on creating hopefully a helpful tool that will allow you to do all of those things, and we'll go through the various functions of those in the space of the next couple of hours. Why use it? It'll help with understanding providers' costs. It is, for all intents and purposes, a calculator. It's not gonna give you any insights other than helping you to understand those costs if you've got the right numbers in there, and helping you to kind of break that down and compare and contrast against others. Allows you to build standard and specialised rates. So we took the view that there are a couple of different reasons why local authorities might want to understand costs. One is for things like framework rates or standard rates that they offer us to the market. So to build those kind of framework rates. And specialised rates as well. So if there are bespoke packages of support or something that's a little bit different from the norm, allow you to build that up as well. So I'll try and show you as much of the functionality as I can to give you an idea of how both of those things work. In terms of how we see kind of supported living, or how we see personal care and support and how we build it up, we look at both hourly and weekly unit costs, and we've tried to make it really clear in terms of looking at both shared or background hours, as they might be called, and one-to-one hours, so that you can kind of really compare and contrast different types of delivery, because different organizations and different support plans and needs will have different ways of delivering that support. So we've tried to give you as much flexibility as possible with regards to that. Providers can use it. It's on our website, so it's free to go and download. The license is there for local government association and members and providers as well. So there's transparency with regards to that. We hope that it will become a single place for recording the cost of supported living placements. There's functionality in the tool to be able to save and recall cost models. So once you've built one, you can save it into the toolkit and come back to it at a later date. And obviously it gives you that kind of record and database of costs and individual placements, or fee uplifts, framework rates, that kind of thing that you might want to build in it. So we've really tried to build it with that in mind as well. It's a single file, so it's not on the web. You download it. It's Excel based, which comes with the advantages and limitations that all Excel based things do. But on the advantages front, it means that no data will go in and out of it. So once you download it from our website, that's it. You've got it on your secure server or your network shared drive in the local authority. So just from that perspective, it's secure. And again, because of that, there's no login required. So you don't have to sign up to the website. You can just go on and download it. And finally, it's free to use. So LGA purchased the license for, as say, members and providers to use. So there's no cost to using it. I know it's probably obvious, but a point to make: it won't tell you what to pay. Okay, so whilst it'll hopefully give you lots of helpful insights, we can't tell you, or the model can't tell you, right, well, it should be, this is the rate, or X or Y is the rate. In terms of help, so this is our website, costofcaretoolkit.co.uk. When you first go on it, it'll ask you whether you want to look at home care or supported living. Obviously, if you want to go to supported living, there's a little drop down in the menu bar that you can go to the download page. We have updated the toolkit since the last session we did last week, because we had an issue with saving, and a couple of people alerted us to that issue. So that's now fixed. So if anyone was using a previous version, please do go download the latest version. I've got it on there. It's 1.22. It was released this month. So please download that and make sure you're using the latest version. If you do want to receive updates, you can register at the bottom of every page. So this little box here is on every page. So do encourage you to register. We don't send any marketing or anything out. It is purely there just to let people know when we're doing things like webinars. If there's FAQs and guidance documents and things like the recording, we'll obviously email out through our mailbox to let everyone know that there's recordings of things like this live. And if we do updates, obviously, to the toolkit, then we'll let everyone know through that as well. As I said before, it uses Microsoft Excel 365 for desktop. I'm being very specific there because it was developed with that version in mind. There's a lot of formulas and bits of code in it. So what we can't guarantee is that it will work on either the online version of Excel or things like Google Sheets, for instance. There's a lot of compatibility between the two systems. But again, it was developed using all of the functionality that Microsoft 365 offers. So that is the single best version. If you're using it and you've encountered any problems and you're not using this version of Excel, I would encourage you first and foremost to use that version of Excel. But I'm hoping I'm talking to people in the room that probably have Microsoft Office subscriptions as part of their local authority anyway, so that should be okay. There are some permissions, so I'm going to go through just kind of downloading the toolkit in the first instance and getting it running. There are a couple of permissions. Obviously, if you're using a work laptop or a work computer, there might be some of these things that you need to check with IT. There's nothing kind of scary or untoward in there. It's just to let you know that obviously, as we like to lock a lot of things down from an IT perspective, there are a couple of things that might just automatically need that don't come kind of unlocked automatically. And then finally, you can password protect Excel files. So for everyone that knows how to do that, then obviously you can password protect the file. So once you start putting some data into it, we would really just recommend that so that there's additional security on it. And then for anything on the front of the toolkit, if you've got any technical queries, then that's our email address. So that goes into our support mailbox. We'll try and get back to you as soon as we can. It's not necessarily manned 24/7, but we try and get responses back within kind of 24, 48 hours. So if you've got anything technical, like last week, we had an issue with saving things. We fixed that. Please do let us know, and we'll get back to you through that. And then just a final thing, please do always download it from the website just to make sure you've got the latest version. So if you're working with providers, for instance, if you want to send it out to providers, I would always just send them the link to the website so that they can go and download it from there rather than send a copy of the file, unless obviously there's some data in it that you've created and you want to check with providers. But yeah, if you just send it out or want someone to pick up a blank copy, please do direct them to the website. Just to download it in the first instance, so if you go to this website, costofcaretoolkit.co.uk, and click on supported living, which is just over here on the right, it just brings you to the homepage for supported living. Just gives you a bit of information about why we've developed it, how we've developed it, how we've used it. Up at the top on the menu, there's a little download button in the drop down. And then you can see here, so May 24, 2024, version 1.22, that's the latest version. So if you want to download that, just do Toolkit, and I'll save this. I'm just going to save this into my downloads folder now. Okay. When you save it, so I've got it here, it comes as a zipped file, so you just have to extract that. So hopefully most people should be okay with that, but if not, again, this is where you probably might want help from your IT department, because websites don't necessarily like Excel files with lots of code in them just loose, so we have to kind of compress them and put them into a different folder. So I'll just extract that, and my folder is here. If I just check, yeah, this one, and then when I open up the file, I'll just double click that. Sorry, it's just coming up on my other monitor. Let's drag it over. Okay, so when I first open this, it will come up with the first page, which is the end user license agreement. And before we do anything, you will likely get a little yellow bar up at the top, so it'll just say that it's in protected view. Most spreadsheets have this, so you're probably very familiar with this. If you just click enable editing, then you may also get this red bar which says Microsoft has blocked macros from running because the source of this file is untrusted. And that is purely because it's been downloaded from a website and it's not come native from the computer itself or from an email or something like that. So what we have to do first is unblock this file. So if I come out of it and I just right click the file here and go to properties, and I appreciate this is going to be really small for everyone, but I'm doing this for the benefit of the recording as well, so that we can have this here as well for posterity. There's a little bit in the bottom of the securities tab that says properties tab that says security, and then this little checkbox here that says unblock. If you just check that and click OK or apply, that should be unblocked now. So if I go back into this file, and I'll click enable content again, that red bar will go. That's important because a lot of the code in it won't work if you have that red bar there. So that's just something to note to make sure that it's kind of unlocked and you're ready to use it. As I say, that's something outside of our control, just because it's obviously we have to put it on a website so that people can download it. So there's a little hoop to jump through that. As I say, once you open it up, it's like any other Excel spreadsheet. So it's got tabs along the bottom, but the other tabs also have a little side menu as well for easier navigation. So once you get into it, first thing to do is just click accept and start, and it will take you into the main toolkit. Okay. So the first page in the toolkit we get to is the settings page, and we've directed people to this first because we encourage everyone, if you're opening it for the first time and just setting this up, to come into this tab and just make sure all of the kind of global settings are correct and to your needs. First thing to do is select your council. All this does is just at the top of every page, it will give you your council name. So it's just helpful to know if you get sent one from another council, if you're doing anything kind of regional or across local authorities, it's helpful to know where they've come from. So we'll just put that at the top. I'm going to click Kirklees because that's my local council. So it looks familiar to me. And then the rest of this page really relates to some of the kind of global settings that when we're looking at business costs and provider costs and staffing and things like that, there are certain things that we obviously need to take into account. Employers' national insurance thresholds. So we've got the threshold for the lower and upper earnings limits for employers' national insurance and the percentage cost. So that adds on the costs when we get into the model. It'll add the employers' national insurance costs on. We've got lower and upper pension thresholds. I'll go through those once we get into the model because they're, if anyone knows anything about how automatic enrolment works and qualifying earnings in particular as a subject, then this relates to that qualifying earnings point. So when we're accruing pensions, depending on how the provider accrues pensions or pays for pensions, you might need to use these lower and upper pension thresholds. These are already set in the toolkit, all of these numbers, as the current national guidelines. So if any of those change in the future, then you can go and change these numbers so that you're not relying on a new toolkit to come out where these numbers are updated. So we've given you that flexibility to be able to update those yourself. Employers' pension percent, again, this is just another one as a very standard generic point. 3% is the statutory minimum for qualifying earnings, so 3% is the employer's pension contribution there. Again, you can change that, could be more than that if your provider does so. And then the last bit on the settings is relates to bank holidays. So the model works on an hourly and a weekly and an annual basis. So what the model will do is it will annualize all of the costs up to take into account staffing costs over the course of a typical year, let's say a calendar year or a financial year, whichever one you want to look at. With regards to that, there are obviously bank holidays which we typically pay at different rates. So what we need to do is we need to tell the model how many bank holidays are we going to pay, because bank holidays change. Typically it's 8, but obviously in past recent years we've had a lot more than that. Generally, most of the years have had more than 8 bank holidays. And we've done it in 2 ways. We've split the bank holidays into what we call Premium 1 and Premium 2. The reason we've done that is what a lot of providers might do is they might have a certain rate for what I might call standard bank holidays. So anything that's not Christmas and New Year typically might have one rate, and then for Christmas and New Year, which might be special bank holidays, and typically they're the ones that are obviously harder to staff, they might pay a different rate. So we've put 2 different rates in there. When we get into the model, I'll show you how those work so that you can vary bank holiday pay rates. Okay. Once you've set this up, you shouldn't really need to come back to this page again, but again, we just direct you to it first once you first go into the model, just so that you can check that all the parameters are correct in there. There's a user guide in here as well, just FYI, in terms, just takes you back to the EULA, but there's a user guide in here. It's a very brief one. I would encourage people to look at, we've got like tooltips and notes on each of the fields, so that if you're ever stuck whilst you're building a model, there's guidance notes in there as you go through as well. It'll help you understand what number it's asking for and how to go through things. So I'm on Add Change Model. This is what everyone will primarily use. This is the bit where we build up a cost model, we build up a placement cost or a framework rate, whatever we're trying to do. It's a big long page, so it's a big old form, but once you started to fill it in and you do it for multiple different placements and providers, and you get used to it, it shouldn't take that long once you've done the first few, because we can bring models back into it. We don't have to fill this in every single time. We can use information from models that we've got in the database. It's split into sections, so you can see the blue headers here, section 1, 2. There's 8 sections in it. And just for visibility's sake, you can use these little arrows to hide and show each of the sections individually. So if there's particular bits that you're working on and you don't want to see the whole thing, you can just hide a section, show it, edit whatever you need to edit, close it again, you can save it. There's also a little hide all and show all button up at the top here. So if I click hide all, It will hide all of the sections, so I've got a very short page now, but obviously there's no fields visible for me to fill in. And then if I click show all, it will open the whole form up again. Okay, I tend to keep the form open completely just because obviously I'm used to using it, so I don't necessarily need to need anything visual there. But yeah, that's just there as a little aid if there's just too many boxes and things on the screen at once. First section is about the cost model. So we need to give, in order for our toolkit to save something, we need to give it some generic details. So first one is cost model name. You can put in whatever you want here. You can put the service user's name, or if you want to keep it pseudonymized, you can put in initials. You can put the provider's name if you want. I tend to go with something fairly unique. So let's say Bob's SL Plan 2024. Okay, so we've got Bob as a service user, Spot Living Plan 2024. Model ID is just another unique identifier that you can put in. We've put this in because we tend to say things like if you've got a CRM, so Liquid Logic or something like that, if you've got an identifier in that system and you want to be able to track back and be able to look at which number it is, I would encourage you to use this box essentially to do that. So let's say this is record 80005. Just for argument's sake, because I made a number up, that will be in the model now. So we can use these two things to check who we're looking at essentially at any point in time. Date, if you hover over it, it'll say date of completion of this toolkit. That's just a suggestion. You could put, let's say if this was the date that this support plan for Bob started, I could put that date in as well. Just on the side of this, you've got these little buttons here. So if I click the calendar in the middle, it will just input today's date. So you don't have to necessarily type the whole date out. If you do the bold arrows on the left and right, it will move it 1 day back and 1 day forward. And then the double arrows, like the fast forward and the rewind, will do it a week, so 7 days. Okay, so that's just helps you easily put a date in if you need to put a date in quickly. Person completing this toolkit. So again, the tooltip says the assessor, brokerage officer, or other authorized person completing this form. So I'm just going to put Simon back. So that's me. And then on the right hand side, we've got some parameters, some options that we can apply. So these are, again, to identify this cost model that we're building. So in each of these, you can click whether it's a learning disability, physical disability, mental health, or other. And there's only one option. It's just Y for yes. And you can select as many of these as you want. So let's say that this is a LD type placement for argument's sake, because a lot of obviously CRM systems categorize by these typical categories. And then we've also got age as well. So there are 3 options here, and I appreciate the drop downs. I can't do anything about the size of the drop downs, unfortunately. They are what they are, even though the toolkit's kind of blown up and I've made it bigger. The little drop downs say the size they are, so I appreciate you probably won't be able to see them, but the options here are 18 to 65, 65 plus, or all age. So let's assume that this is a working age adults, either provider or placement, and that's what we're building up. So I'll just click 18 to 65 there. You've got a free text box for a brief description of the model as well. So if there's any other identifying things that you want to put in there, I'll put created following quote received from provider or Bob's support. Yeah. But yeah, again, you can put whatever you want in there. That's just a free text box. So the model is quite agnostic about the application, if that makes sense. So you could be building a generic service, let's say, that doesn't actually exist, but it represents the average of services in your area, and you want to build a framework rate for the purposes of saying, here's our breakdown, here's how our council's standard rate that we offer builds up. Okay, so you could use it like that. You could also use it for individual placements. So if you get a provider, if you've got a client that you need to place, and you've got support needs and things, and you want to build that up individually, you can do it like that as well. And you can also do it by setting. So let's say that we've got, and I'll show you each of these as we go through. But let's say that you've got a setting with let's say it's a 4-person setting, so there's 4 flats in a block, and you want to look at the whole cost of that, or the individualized cost of that. You can do it like that as well. So it's quite flexible. So it's completely dependent on your I guess out of those, what you're intending to make. With regards to things like if you're looking at standardizing service costs and you want to build something up, we'll come to it when we come to things like the benchmarking and the dashboard, but once you've got a few individual costs in here, let's say you want to get costs from different providers, so you survey 10 providers and you have all of their cost models in here, there's functionality in here that will allow you to look at and compare the costs across each of those so that you can then make determinations around what you think general costs are. And if you're using that to either do things like fee uplifts or set your framework rates, you can do that as well. So section 2, section 2 all asks about the provider or the setting details. Again, just going back to Julie's previous question, if we're building up a generic framework rate that we as a council are setting, then you can largely ignore provider settings and you can replace that in your head with council settings. So things like if you want to build a framework rate, then instead of provider name, you might want to type this is Kirklees Council Framework. Okay. But from the perspective of the model, it's typically looking for, this is a placement because that's the most individual level we can get to give you the most flexibility. So you can give it some information about the type of provider, what the place or the setting is, how many people are in it. If you've had a quote from the provider in terms of the cost, then you can put that in as well. Okay. So I'll fill this in just as a generic provider. So what did we say? So this is Bob. So let's say it's I don't know, we'll make up a generic name, Flower Court Supported Living, okay, and we'll say that the place is setting is Flower Court. So we've got provider organisation type. So again, in the drop down, there are various different things. So you can say, is it a private limited company? Is it a partnership? Is it a social enterprise? If it's an internal council service, you can put that as well. Or if it's a traded company, a local authority traded company, you put that in as well, or other. Let's just assume this is a private limited company. So we'll put LTD there. And then the next two sections ask us about how many people are in the setting. So this is essentially the occupied volume, the occupied accommodation, and then we've got max occupancy. So again, going back, I'll use my example of, let's say that this is a block of 4 flats. So the setting is essentially the 4 flats. This is Flower Court, and let's say that it's full. Okay, so I'll put 4 people in the setting, and I'm assuming that we could build the cost up for the whole setting, or we could put Bob as an individual in the setting and look at his individual cost. Okay, so 4 people in the setting, and I'll say max occupancy is 4 as well. The reason why we've got both of them in there is you can also use this model to look at things like void costs. So for instance, if you're looking at a provider's cost and they've got 4 beds and there are only 3 people in there, then there's going to be a certain amount of void cost that essentially gets covered by the other placements. So the individual cost for you, either unit hourly rate or weekly rate, might go up based on the fact that there are some voids in there. You can do it either way. So you can do it including voids, without voids. It's just how you manipulate the kind of the number of people in there and the occupancy. But when we come to filling it, when we've filled it in and we've got some numbers in here, I can show you how that works. Okay. We've got a box for quoted hourly fee. So I'm going to assume that Flower Court have sent me a quote for £27.50 an hour. And then you can see underneath says Toolkit hourly cost, and it's in red. This will build up as we start to fill some of the boxes in. This will start to appear as a, the number will start to appear here. So we can use this as a cost for comparison. Okay. You've also got some other little blue boxes here that tell me things like the cost per week. So I've got the cost per hour and the cost per week. And I've also got the split of background hours and direct one-to-one hours here as well. So these numbers will start to build up as we build the costs. There's a section for provider and location ID. I'm just going to make up a number here because obviously this is a made-up provider, and we'll try and make it in the style of a CQC style kind of ID. So, but again, these are just things that you can put in to record, and it will save it in the toolkit. There's also a field to say whether it's out of area or not. So if you're, so we assume that the placement or the provider or the rate we're picking is for our local authority. However, if you want to look at an individual out of area placement, you can just click the drop down or type in Y and it'll say yes. And then this box underneath it, which was greyed out a second ago, appears, and it just asks for the host council. So let's say that this is out of area, and let's say that we're next door in Bradford, okay, just for argument's sake. You can, obviously, if it isn't out of area, then just leave that blank and it'll say NA and it greys that out. So section 3 and 4 and 5 actually all relate to our care staff. Okay, so we need to tell it what the structure and the infrastructure around our care staffing looks like. And we do this in a number of ways. This first section is all around the kind of the global parameters that apply to staff in this provider or in this setting. So we've got things, questions about pension contributions. We've got questions around training, holiday and sickness, our bank holiday premiums that I mentioned earlier, full-time equivalent hours, and we've got a section around handovers as well. So all of these things will impact on the cost of they will all impact on our hourly rate. Either they'll move it up or down depending on what we put in here.
So as I've understood it, looking at what you've just talked about, we'd have to physically add background hours into that. Is that correct? Have I understood it correctly? So I'm just wondering, will this tool work out if we're putting all this level of details in around properties and so forth? Will it actually work out the number of background hours per property, if that makes sense, based on need?
No, not if you haven't put it in. So
no,
so I would just say this is just a calculator. So if you want to, but what it will do is if you say there are 100 hours of background hours a week and there are 4 people in there, then it will distribute that equally. So it will say, well, each person should have 25 hours a week background. Is that the question that you were asking?
Yeah, maybe? that's lovely.
Oh, yes. So yes, it will do that. Yeah.
That's great.
It will distribute that. In terms of before we get to the specifying of hours, we need to give it some parameters. So we need to tell it, well, what is it going to add on? Typically, we call it on costs on top of a direct hour of staff being paid. First one is pension contribution type. So you've got 2 choices. You can have basic pay or you can have qualifying earnings. If you choose QE, I'll just shorten it to QE because that's typically what we use. And I'll just click back into the settings tab just to show you this. This lower and upper pension threshold applies. So what this means is you don't start qualifying to earn pension contributions from your employer until you hit earnings of £6,240 a year. So anything under that, a staff member gets paid, they won't earn any pension contribution, and then up to 50k a year. Okay, and that's if you choose QE. Sorry about that. If you choose basic pay, you start accruing pension contributions on all of your pay regardless. So the reason why we've added both of those in there is because each employer will operate differently. If I'm just generically building a support plan up, I might not, or a provider's cost up or a framework cost, I might not know the answer to whether it's QE or basic pay. I like to be a little bit conservative on that one and just choose basic pay if I'm just building up a model without any other information. It will obviously mean that my pension contributions cost more, but I'd rather do that for the sake of because it will literally be pennies. I'd rather do that if I'm just building something, I want to check something. Okay. And then we want the contribution percent. So in the settings, we've got a suggestion of 3%. So you can use that if you want, or you can use a different one if you know the provider pays a particular rate. I'll just put 3% in there just to make it clear that we're going to do the statutory 3% contribution. And then we've got a box that says percentage of staff receiving pension contributions. So this is essentially the proportion of all staff. I'll read it as it says. Proportion of all staff receiving employers' pension contributions. It'll be calculated at a flat rate for all staff in sections 4 and 5. So if I put in 50%, then it means that only 50% of all of the staff costs will accrue pension. If I put 100%, then it means all of the staff costs will accrue. Obviously, in the UK, we have an opt-out, an active opt-out system, which means that more often than not, people are going to have a pension than not. So again, if I'm being conservative, I usually just keep that at 100%, but the flexibility is there if you want to see the impact of different pension contributions. Then we've got some non-working, non-kind of direct care delivery costs here. So we need to pay for things like training, holiday and sickness. It asks for a number of days per annum. So we assume that over the course of a year, how many days would a staff member be doing training, holiday and having sickness? Obviously, with regards to a full-time equivalent, then statutory minimum is 28 days. So I'll just use that in this instance to say that we're just going to do 28 days. I'll put an apportionment in of, let's say we'll do 8 days of statutory training or whatever the provider delivers as training, and we'll do 5 days of sickness. Obviously, with regards to things like sickness, that proportion is going to change day in, day out, depending on how many people are off sick. We just need you can just put in a number to say this is what I expect in terms of what's going to be covered in terms of my cost model for a generic number of sickness days. And then if you hover over, it should, yeah, it just says enter the annualized number of days per staff. It applies to all staff.
Yes, it is. So obviously there would be some variability year on year. Well, a couple of years ago, Jubilee, we had a couple of extra bank holidays. So yes, it would be statutory minimum plus that. Yeah.
If you're doing it for a year that has 9 bank holidays in it, then yeah, you might want to put 29 in there. That's a good point. It is inclusive of bank holidays, yeah. So then we get to our bank holiday premiums. So as I explained in the settings tab, essentially this is the multiplier that you apply to the standard rates. We haven't put any standard rates in because they're in the next section, but here it will tell us whenever we hit a bank holiday or the hours that we need to accrue for the bank holiday, what's the multiplier we're going to use. So I'm going to assume that this provider doesn't add any premium on for, so remember we had premium 1 and premium 2. If I go back into my settings, you can see that 6 out of the 8 bank holidays are premium 1. And 2 out of the 8 bank holidays are premium 2. So it's going to multiply my cost in those proportions. So I'm going to assume that this provider doesn't pay any extra on most of the bank holidays. So let's say the 6 out of the 8 a year, but I'm going to assume that they pay double on Christmas and New Year. So those 2 days that I specified are Christmas and New Year. I'm going to assume we pay double for those. You can see at the bottom of that, then we've got this little information box that says on shift FTE. This is 84.2%. This changes depending on what additional days you put in here. So if we increase the number of training, holiday or sickness, then the amount of time that we get per FTE we pay for that's actually on shift reduces. So if I put that training days up to 12, then my proportion of on shift time that I actually get for the pay that I have to give is lower. So it's 82.7%. Okay, that just gives you a sense of, for every 1 whole-time equivalent person that I pay for, how much of their time do I actually get on shift, i.e. contributing to my direct or my background care hours. FTE hours, so this is used to calculate things like distribution of background staffing hours, one-to-one staffing hours, because we need to know if we're specifying hours a week in a support plan, or again, background hours or for the setting, we need to know how many staff that is to be able to calculate things like employers' NI, pension costs and the like. So we need to know how many hours a full-time equivalent typically works, okay? So these are usually contractual things that the provider has, and typically it's going to be something like 37 hours or 37.5 hours, 38 hours, 40 hours. I've seen some at 42 hours. It's basically what's the number of hours a week that's in the contract that someone works. I typically like to use 37.5 because it's probably the most recognized number when we talk about full-time equivalent hours. But again, there are different ones. It has a minor impact on the costs, but obviously it does have an impact. So we've made it flexible there so that it's not just something that you assume as part of the model, so that you know that it's there. And then finally in this section, we've got a couple of boxes relating to handover. Okay, so you can see here there's some notes. So the above denotes where the handover time is factored into background hours in section 4. So when we've got background hours, sometimes we might have some handover time that's physically paid for by the provider. So for instance, if we've got, let's say a 24-hour day, we might have 3 shifts throughout that day, 3 8-hour shifts. Okay, but we might have some handover time at the end of someone's shift to physically have some crossover so that we can pay for, so that we can hand over notes, things like that. If you want to include time for that and cost for that in the hourly rate or the model that you're calculating, this is the section that we do that in. Okay, not a lot of providers have things like handover costs and stuff like that. Some do, some charge it separately, but if you want to calculate it as part of an hourly rate to see what the impact is, then you would do it in this section. So the 2 questions that we ask are, how many handovers do we have? So what's the number of handovers per 24-hour period? So if I take my example of we've got 3 8-hour shifts in the day, I'm going to have 3 points there where I have to hand over. So if I put 3 in there, tells me how many. And then the second question is, how many minutes per shift do I have crossover time? Okay, so once I get to the end of the 8-hour shift, what portion of time do I essentially have to double pay staff because I've got more than this? I've got some crossover between staff leaving and staff coming on. So if I do something like 15 minutes, let's say, this little blue box here you can see has some text in it now. So what it says is 45 minutes of paid handover time, i.e. 0.75 hours, will be added to each 24-hour period of waking staff time. Yeah, and when I say waking staff, that's daytime and waking night staff. So each of those, all of those hours essentially will have some handover time now applied to them. So you can use that. As I said, for most instances, it probably won't be either used or it might be done slightly differently. But when it comes to things like when you've got a lot of background staff in a setting and you're trying to figure out what the costs of that is, it might be helpful to have that. Yes, I would. Yeah. So that's a good question. That's a good question. You can, because we're not specifying every single staff member on the employee list, and we don't know every staff member's full-time equivalents. You're right. You're going to have. It's not going to be exactly 100% to the provider's incurred costs. It's going to be there or thereabouts, and I would probably say there's probably pennies in between what the variance of some people full-time, some people part-time is. But yeah, I would average it at something like, let's say it's 20 hours a week, for instance. Yeah. The helpful thing with supported living services, unlike home care, because for those of you who've used the home care toolkit, home care is typically not full-time. However, with supported living providers, you've got a much higher propensity for staff to be full-time. Not saying it's going to be everyone, but there's a higher propensity for that to happen in supported living services than it is in something like home care. So hopefully it wouldn't be too much of an issue. So section 4 and 5 relate to the background and the direct one-to-one hours. So now that we've filled in our parameters up here, we now need to tell it what this setting looks like. So remember, we're doing a block of 4 flats. I try to avoid saying 4-bedded unit because it makes it sound like residential, and it's not. This is meant to be individual tenancies. We're looking at supported living. So we're doing a block of 4 flats, and we've got some background support that applies across all of them. So up here it tells us that the shared staffing hours here cover all people within the setting per day. So also known as background and shared care hours, core hours as well, as someone added. You could call it core hours as well. Specific one-to-one hours, i.e. personal care and support directly for the individuals being supported, are input in the next section. So don't put anything in here that kind of forms part of that support plan for a person when you're building up their one-to-one support. You can do that in the next section. But what you do need to do in this section is define the pay rates for all of the staff. Okay, so this section here, and you can see the column that's highlighted in pink, is gross pay per hour. So you can see we've got a number of different kind of levels of staff down the side. So we've given you a table with some suggestions of different types of staff. And for each of them, we've got 3 kind of sets of columns. So we can do day, night, or waking night, as you might want to call it, and then sleeping night. Okay, so you can specify the parameters for each one of these separately. And the reason for that is obviously there's going to be different types of cover hours. There might be different staffing levels, and there probably will be different types of different pay per hour. So there might be enhancements for things like night, and there's obviously going to be a different cost for night shifts, for sleeping shifts as well. So in order to build this up, I'm going to put some background hours in here. I'm going to put some care and, let's say, senior carer support in here. So first of all, I need to define what are the cover hours in the daytime per 24-hour period. So I might say that there are 14 hours that we count in this provider's daytime. I want 2 staff members on during the day, and I'm going to pay them, let's say, £11.50, so pretty close to national living wage on that one. At night, so for the night cover hours, then we've said 14 in the day, so by process of elimination, night has to be 10, because we can't say there's more than 24 hours cover. And again, if we're thinking about it in terms of handovers, remember we've included handovers here, so we don't need to have any crossover down here because we'd be double counting that cost. Okay, so we're going to have 10 hours of cover during the night. We're going to go down to 1 staff member background per night, but we're going to give them an enhancement of 50p an hour if they're doing a waking night. Okay. Similar with senior carer, let's put one senior carer on and we'll put them on at £12.50. And we will, I tell you what, we won't put anything on at night for them, but what I might want to do is put in a waking night. So what I still need to do here, and it will tell you in the tooltip, you must enter a gross hourly rate for each required staff type in order to calculate one-to-one hours cost. So this is the only place in the model where we get to define the staff pay rates at every level. So when we go to the next section and we start talking about direct support hours, there's nowhere in here that asks you what the pay rate is for them. It's all done up here, primarily because it's quite an in-depth model as it is. So to add another parameter of pay rate separately for everything would just add even more complexity. So we try to keep it simple and say there's only one place where you have to really define a pay rate for a staff member. You don't have to do it multiple times in the model. The reason I've defined the pay rate here, I've left that number of staff members blank. So what that means is it's not going to calculate any hours or any pay for this nighttime member of staff. You can see over here the total weekly hours for the senior carer is 98. If I put a 1 in there, it'll go up to 168. So that's just added on a bunch of nights for the week. Okay, so if I take it out, we'll just do 98. If I delete the 10, it doesn't do anything because it's effectively multiplying it by 0. But yeah, so let's say that that's our background hours. So quite a lot of background hours in there, but just for the purposes of showing you calculation. Obviously, there are things like you can see there's nursing costs, there's therapies, other specialists, team leader, supervisor. We've got another section further on in the model where you can specify other types of management activity. So you can put a team leader in here or some kind of direct support from a more senior member of staff if you want, but equally you can also put it in a section further below as well. So there's some flexibility with that. Yes. So if you want to put, if we're assuming that this is a block of 4 and we want to have sleeping and waking night, you can add all of these in here. So let's say that I'll do it as a carer because it probably would be a carer. If I have a sleeping shift, now the difference here is, in fact, this is an important point now that Julie's raised it. The gross pay for this is per night shift, not per hour, because typically most providers pay it as a sum for the night shift. So that's why we ask for it per night shift rather than per hour. You can obviously calculate per hour or the other way around if you need to, but let's just say that per night shift, it's 10 hours because it's the same as the night, and it's £110 a night. So in this model now, we've got a sleeping night, we've got a waking night, and we've got some daytime hours. Okay, so that's in there. This section, this background hour section, divides all of these costs by every person that's in the building. So if there's 4, we said 4 people, this is shared across 4 people. When we come to the one-to-one hours, you can specify which bits are shared by what. So you can't do that here because that's determined by this is for the place. When we come to, let's say that there are 2 people that need a waking night, then we'll start to specify that down below here. So section 5, direct support hours. So the difference in this section is we're looking at the individual. So we're building up one person for the support plan just for the week. Okay, so let's assume that we've got Bob, who's in this 4-bedded unit for block of 4 flats, and we now want to put his individualized support plan in here. If you are building up a generic provider's cost, then you may not put any one-to-one costs in here. You may build it just based on this background hours. Or equally, you might not put any background hours in and you just put some direct support hours in to try and simulate what the typical volume of that provider is. Either way, having some volume in there is going to be important because that's going to give you your base hourly rate from which to work off. So when you start looking at changes to that hourly rate, or when you start to look at the impact of more staff in background or more staff in one-to-one, you're going to want to know the differences there. So we need to know where we're specifying things, but equally doesn't really matter too much if we're building up a generic support plan and we're not doing something specific. In this case, I want to do something specific for Bob. So Bob's already got a share of this background hour, these background hours here, but I'm also going to add in some one-to-one support. And the way that I do that is slightly different. we've got a column for staffing ratios, which I'm sure everyone's familiar with, but we can go through it. The type of staff that's providing the support. So in this drop down, you've got all of the options that we had in the table above. So we've got carer, senior carer, assistant nurse, registered nurse, therapies, other specialist, team leader. So you can specify the type of staff. And then the 3 boxes here are how many hours per week are in our support plan for day, night, and then sleeping. So day, waking night, and sleeping night. So let's assume that we've got a carer here and it's 1-to-1, so it's just one staff member. And let's do, let's say that they get, I don't know, 5 hours on a Monday and 5 hours on a Wednesday support. So because we're building this one up for the week, and you can see the little tip at the top says, if we're doing 24/7 cover, we need to type 168 in one of these boxes if we want to do it 24/7. But that's just as an example to remind people that we're trying to build it up for a week. So I'm assuming that I've got 5 hours on 2 days of the week. So I'm going to put 10 hours in here in the daytime. We're not going to have any night or sleeping on this occasion for that. I'm going to leave it like that. So what it'll do is the 10 hours there, and it annualizes it as well. So it's 520 because it's 52 weeks in the year that we use. That tells me how many hours I've got in my model so far. Let's say that I want to add in a waking night, and because I've got 4 people in the setting, I don't want to specify the costs of this to be shared across all 4. So I'm going to specify this in the 1-to-1 hours. And if I've, as you see, I've clicked the drop down in the ratios. I've got lots of different ratios I can use here. So I can do 1-to-1, 2-to-1, all the way up to 4-to-1. But I can do some weird and wonderful ones as well. Now, these are not typically used. However, we've worked with services that have things like a 5-to-4 ratio and a 3-to-4 ratio and a 2-to-3 ratio. So we try to put in as many ratios as possible just to try and give the flexibility for all sorts of different models. I'm going to use 1-to-2. So you can see here, it says 0.5 staff. I'll just delete the 2 below it so that it doesn't show it yellow. I want to do 1-to-2. So I'm sharing this particular support line with another person. Okay, so it's going to halve the cost of it, whatever I put in. I'm going to do it as a waking night, and I'm going to do it as let's say it's 10. So I'm going to do a formula in this one just because it's a bit easier for me to do. So 10 times 7. So let's say that there are 10 hours a night of a shared staff member, a shared senior care in this instance. Now, what you can see over the side is the weekly hours aren't 10 plus 70. They're 10 plus half of 70, which is 35. So it's told me 45. So I'm physically paying for 45 hours because I've told the model that I'm sharing that staff member, okay, with another person. If I wanted to double the cost, then it would be 2-to-1 rather than 1-to-2, of course. So I'm happy with that. It's a very basic model, but let's go with that. Oh, in fact, I tell you what, no, let's just do something else for argument's sake. Let's do let's do 1-to-3, and let's say that there is some kind of therapies here as well for, I don't know, 8 hours a week. Okay, so 8 hours of the week, they're in some kind of group session with 2 other people. So I'm sharing it across 3, and I'm going to add that therapy staff on as well. Okay, so it's added the weekly hours on here. This bit over here is not too relevant, but it just gives you an idea of what full-time equivalence required just for the on-shift hours. It's obviously used in the calculation, but we've kind of hidden most of that just so that you're not overwhelmed with numbers. But this table just does tell you some of the on-shift full-time equivalent information in case you need it. So that's our support plan. So our support plan is 47.7 hours a week, 1-to-1 time. And obviously we've got a share of all of these background hours, these 350 odd background hours up here. If I calculate that right. A couple more sections to go on this, and then we'll get into some of the analysis of the toolkit and what the model can do with when we're looking at multiple different sources as well. We've got a couple more sections to go through on this one, so we're nearly. But as I say, it's a big form, and it's essentially the engine room behind how the whole model works. So it's important to just take some time and walk through this. Section 6 is then we're starting to look at background staff now. So we specified all of our background care support and our 1-to-1 care support. So we want to look at all of those other overheads that make up the service. Again, we're doing this from the perspective of a setting, which is a block of 4 flats in this instance. So I want to apportion the costs here to what this provider would expect for that for that part of their business. So let's say that one setting, okay? That's going to be different depending on different providers, of course. If it's a larger provider and they've got multiple settings, they'll have a completely different back office structure and regional and head office management structure than a smaller provider, let's say, who has just this setting or this setting and another one, which is in the same local authority. Okay, so we just need to take into account some knowledge of the provider if we're trying to build this up from our knowledge, or if we've obviously got the breakdown from the providers filling this in. Just need to be conscious that this is for the whole setting. So, and it tells you up at the top of the section there, specify cost for the whole setting. So when it comes to things like locality, deputy manager, registered manager, finance, other admin, things like that, we want to look at what contribution will go into this setting. If we want to look at the individual, when we come to the breakdown, it will break that down as well. So it will divide everything we put in here, it will divide by 4 to say there are 4 people in this setting anyway, because we specified that. Okay, so let's assume that there's a locality manager that works across both of these settings. So I'm going to put half full-time equivalent. It's full-time equivalent, but I'm going to say it's split between another setting. And let's say that they're, what should we call them? We'll do £18 an hour. Okay, so I can see that the annual net pay cost per full-time equivalent is 35,000. So that's the locality manager's cost. In terms of this setting, the net pay cost is half of that, 17,550. We've also calculated the employer's NI cost and pension, so we get the gross cost that goes into this setting from that, and that's my apportionment of that cost. Let's not have a deputy because we've already got a locality manager, but let's have a registered manager, and let's assume that this registered manager works across 4 settings. So we're gonna half it again. Okay, so I put 0.25 in there. I appreciate it says 0.3, but if you look in the formula box at the top, you can see what you've actually typed. We've just rounded the number in the box so that you don't get lots of decimal places. And let's say it's £23 an hour. So that gives me a annual registered manager cost of 44,850. Might be a bit cheap, might be a bit expensive for some, don't really know, but it looks fairly reasonable to me. So we're going to put that cost in, and we can see here that we've got 11,213 or 11,840 costs applied to this setting. Okay, I might put a little bit in for, let's say that we've got a trainer that also goes across 4 settings, so 2.5 there, 0.25 there. We might say that trainer is paid £16.50 an hour, and let's put in some admin staff as well that works across 4 settings. So I'm going to do I'm going to do 0.25 of other admin for £12.50 an hour. Okay, so what that's done is, you can see here down at the bottom, for this setting I've added £45,000 worth of management and ancillary staffing into this setting. You can see also that I've got this column, it's called custom pension. Okay, so at the bottom, what you can see at the minute is using 3%, because that's what I specified further up in my form. We have put in the facility that you can add in a custom pension for back office staff. The reason why we've done this for back office staff is some providers pay different rates for pension depending on whether you're like a registered manager or something. So you might get a better, you might get a 5% contribution, which is quite typical for a registered manager, compared to a 3% contribution for care staff. So in order to activate that, if you can see, if I put a 5 in there at the minute, it won't change any of the costs. In order to make sure that that column is being considered in our calculation, if I go back up to section 3, you can see here, which I didn't cover before, but I'll cover it now, a little checkbox here that says custom back office pension. So if I check that, what that means is it's now going to use whatever's in these cells to calculate pension costs instead of my standard 3% that I entered. So you can see the one that I put 5% in now has a cost against it. The others don't, because it's not using it's only using what's in these cells. So obviously these are 0. So if I want to put 5% there, 5% there, let's say my training and my other admin still have 3%. So I do need to specify it, because I've said that I want to specify this, but you can use that as a place to put in individualized kind of pension costs, because we found that some providers do that. The one thing I would say about this section before I move on, and I'm sure John might have people with a couple of questions, is just be really careful around NI costs. Considering that we might, if we can do it, depending on the time and resource, add in a functionality to say, do you want to distribute these costs across a number of settings? Because at the minute this is manual. Now, what the effect that has is it'll impact things like employers NI, not so much pension, but employers NI cost. Because if we're only calculating, let's say, half of that locality manager, it doesn't matter so much for that. But when we get to costs that are underneath the employers NI threshold, then you might have some problems in calculating. But typically, it shouldn't be a problem. But I just thought I'd make that point just to say, again, it's going to be like a penny, probably less than a portion of a penny that the impact is going to be, but it's just important to note. By all means, you can use it for a cost of care exercise. That's fine. I think we had a query into the mailbox earlier this week from a council that was actually using it for a cost of care exercise, or maybe a provider that was responding to a council that wanted to use it for a cost of care exercise. So we know people already have started to look at that. With regards to receiving costs from providers, the only facility that you've got at the minute is send a blank copy of this out, get providers to send you it back, and then you input those numbers into your centrally held copy. So that is a manual exercise at the minute. There are lots of things that we might want to do with this. Unfortunately, we were only funded to provide the toolkit to the LGAs as it's been built, which obviously didn't have that functionality in it. So that's where it is at the minute. If you want to look at multiple costs and you want other people to contribute to it, then you'd have to get those costs essentially and fill them in on your central kind of form. You'd have to take those numbers and just, it'd just be a copy and paste, obviously. Okay, final section is then non-pay costs. So put brackets overheads, try to put different types of words in here, so because people obviously recognize these things and different things. But typically this is essentially, this section is for everything that isn't covered by a pay cost somewhere in the model. Okay, there are quite a few different tables or sections in here, and we've tried to split it based on things like care related overheads, back office costs. So if there's like a regional or a national head office that isn't easy to split out with full-time equivalents, for instance, can go through that. Professional costs, so recruitment, professional fees, head office, other types of costs, and then things like break room costs. So for particularly if you've got a multiple occupancy setting, you might actually, and if there's things like another landlord is another company's the landlord, then the care company, the provider of these services, might lease a break room separately, so there might be a cost for that as well. So we've tried to put in as many things that are pretty typical to supported living services in here as possible, and you can add in all of the costs here. So the way that this works is, let's do PPE. I want to do, let's say that it costs me £50 a month in PPE costs. So I'll put £50 in there, and then the period I can actually select different periods. So I've got weekly, 4-weekly, monthly, quarterly, and annually. So I'm going to put monthly in there. And then what you can see here is it's multiplied the cost by 12, because that's my months, and it's given me a total annual cost of £600 for PPE. And each of these is independent, so you can add in costs here independently. The reason why we've got this little period kind of selector here so that you can select the frequency is, let's say that you've got a provider, you've got a cost, and someone has said, oh, my bill for utilities has gone up or whatever, and say you don't have an annual cost for that, you just have the last quarter's bill. So you could put in the quarterly bill, and then it will obviously multiply that by 4 to give you a typical annual cost. I know it's just as easy to say multiply it by 4 yourself and put the annual cost in, but we just want to give people that flexibility so that you don't have to calculate. There's as little as possible that you need to calculate. So if I just fill some of these in, so let's do £12.50 for CQC fees. I won't put anything else in care costs. Let's say that they do have a break room, and let's say it costs £2.10 a month. I am making these up, by the way, so if the cost looks weird, then please forgive me, because I genuinely don't know. Other than what I think is reasonable, I don't know what it will tell me. Other operational management, let's say there's £1,000 a month there for other operational management. Back office costs, so we're not going to do any office rent because we've got a break room, let's say everyone's remote, or it comes into some other costs. No service charges. Utilities, now when it comes to this, remember that we're building this from the perspective of the personal care services company, not the utilities for the tenant, because obviously that's a different thing that's covered by housing. So we're just looking at the personal care and support element of this, and therefore the utilities would just be the supported living company's utility bill. So let's say that that's something like £50 a month. Okay. Office supplies, £100 a month. Insurances, let's say that's £2,500 a year. IT services, yeah, £1,000 a month again. Okay. And other head office business costs, we put some £1,000 in for operational management, so I think I'm okay with that. Might put something in for training expenses, let's say £150 a month for training expenses. Okay. So we've got costs total, annual totals at the bottom of each of these sections now. So that'll go into our total at the bottom. Final section we need to fill in before we get to that is operating surplus or return on operations or profit. Again, we tried to put it in all sorts of different words and use different words so that people recognize it for what it is. There's two ways that you can add profit into the model. You can do a percentage of cost, which is this net profit percentage, or you can do a gross weekly profit in pounds. So for every week of the cost, how many pounds get added on for the profit? Okay, you can use one of those two methods for every model that you build. You just have to specify. So this last, and again, I'm not going to read through all of the tooltips, but everything that with a little red icon gives you some information about what it's doing and what it's asking you for. So you should be able to pick up if you're ever stuck with anything, what it's asking you for. But we just have to then tell the model what allocation method are we using. So we're using the markup percentage, which is this net profit, or are you using this pounds? Okay, so in this little drop down, we've got markup percent or weekly pounds. I'll do markup percent just because I fancy doing that on this one. And let's say that 8% of their cost is profit. Okay, so 8% of that total breakdown is now going to be calculated into my model as an element of profit. It could be the organisation's cost for their own staff's entertainment. Yeah. Essentially, it's free to however you want to cost it. If it's, I would say if you're referencing a service user, entertainment cost for a service user, it wouldn't be typical to put that in an hourly rate. You would probably expense that separately. So once I've done all of that, section 8 then is going to feed me back a load of information about what I've just put into it. So, and coming back to a couple of earlier questions about, is it for a setting, is it for a person, is it for this, is it for that? This is going to tell you different bits of information depending on what you want to look at. So you can look at the cost for the setting, you can look at the cost for the person, you can look at the cost of the background and the direct one-to-one supports costs separately as well. So as you can see in my table, I've got these three columns on the left are for the entire setting. This bit excludes the one-to-one hours because when I'm looking at the whole setting, I'm not looking at individual package costs where we've added hours on. So I only include the background care staff here, but it tells me the cost for running that provider without even considering any one-to-one staff costs. Okay, so before we even kind of press go, just to staff it with the background staff, just to do cover all of the other costs, we can see that it's £431,000 a year for 4 people. Remember, because we're looking at 4 people, or 8,293 a week. Okay. And then this percentage just gives you the percentage cost of each of those as well. Then we've got the individual costs in the right-hand set of columns, and this does include our one-to-one staff. So this does take into account the fact that we're covering both one-to-one costs and background support staff costs here as well. It's again split out by annual, weekly, and obviously because we've got that one-to-one, we can now specify the hourly rate. So we've highlighted this column pink because we think this is probably going to be the most important column of the whole thing. So it tells you here that the hourly rate, the breakdown is as such, and I'm not going to just read all the numbers, but the total there is £20.29. Okay, so that's the effective hourly rate for providing all of that care. Okay, now to understand this, and there's a really key point about this, to understand the hourly rate, the model takes this number here, the shared plus 1-to-1 hours a week. So effectively for this person, the element of shared hours that they get plus the 1-to-1 hours we specified for them is 138.7 hours. Now, the total cost of that's the cost per week. And the hourly rate for, if we were to pay for those 138.7 hours individually, is £20.29, if I can explain it like that. So that gives us the breakdown of that. You can do it in different ways as well. So if you look at the weekly cost, which is 2813, and you say you might break it down as just paying for the 1-to-1 hours and the background hours are covered, then your hourly rate is going to be a lot higher because you're just dividing that number by a smaller number of 1-to-1 hours there. But the weekly cost is going to be the exact same. It's just different ways of breaking it down. You can see here we've got a variance to the quoted cost. So if you remember right up at the top, we put in a cost that this provider had given us. We can see that they've quoted us £7.21 more than our models told us, and in percentage terms, that's 35.5% over what we've got in the model here. Okay, and you can see up here as well, we've got total persons in setting is 4. So again, this is telling us that we're calculating all of this based on 4 people being in the setting. Just want to make a real quick point about void costs, because I know I mentioned that earlier. If you want to say look at void costs, the only change that we need to make to this, because we've built all of these costs up based on 4 people in the setting, if we now only have 3 people in the setting, and I go back up to the top, and if I can find it, yeah, here we go. So total persons in setting, we put as max occupancy as 4. Let's say there's only 3 people. Then I can see here that we've got a change to this model here. So the hourly rate has changed because what it's saying is there are some other costs here that I'm now covering that I wasn't covering before, because I'm now distributing some of these costs over 3 people rather than 4 people. So you can see the impact of different costs, different occupancies in the model as well. Okay, and the cost has gone up ever so slightly because we've now got a lower variance to our quote than we had before. So I think it was like £7 something before, wasn't it? And it's now £6.88. Yeah, so we've kind of covered some of that that cost by doing that. You can obviously see here as well. So the toolkit outlet cost 2029. That's obviously just a repeat of what was down at the bottom. So if you want to do things like this, you can see the impact immediately there rather than having to scroll all the way down to the bottom.
Yeah, sorry, just humour me. Could you go back to table 3, section 5, 4 and 5?
Yeah.
In section 5, you've got therapies.
Yeah,
I can't see where for those 8 hours it's picking up a staff cost.
Oh,
should
you're
you put it
right.
should you put it into section 4 or?
You're absolutely right, Matthew. Thank you so much for that. So for everyone that heard what Matthew was saying and understood it, great. For those that didn't, what Matthew's saying is I've got 8 hours of therapies here in 1-to-1, but as I said before, the model will only calculate a cost for that if I tell it what the hourly rate is up here. So I need to tell it the hourly rate for those therapies for that daytime hour. So you're right. So let's do that now. Thank you for that. That's brilliant. If I'd been a bit quicker off the mark, I'd have said I've made a mistake. Can anyone tell me what it was? But I'll concede that one.
You were just testing us, were you?
Yeah, I was just testing you. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, you can see the hourly rate's gone up, so it's £20.67 now. The hours has remained the same because I had the hours in, I just didn't have any cost associated with it. But I have done now, so obviously that's added a good, what's that, 38p, something like that, hasn't it? Yeah, thank you for that. It looks at a per setting basis rather than an organisation basis, just because there are going to be costs. Businesses operate typically on things like cost centres or profit centres, which is they'll split out the costs of things depending on each operating location, if that makes sense. They are going to have different costs associated with them. So it's more helpful to think about, break the organisation down into this setting and that setting, or this location where we deliver services from, because there's going to be different costs associated with those. So we've chosen to do it at that level rather than an organisation level. The other point as well is to do it at an organisational level. If you're doing something like a national provider, you'd never fill this in, because you might be saying, right, well, I need to calculate the cost of 100 settings with all sorts of different occupancies in them and all of the staff, and I want it to boil it down into the background cost for me. That's probably not going to be achievable for anyone to get that level of detail of cost from a provider. So we look at it from a setting perspective purely for that. It makes more logical sense and it's a lot easier as well. So for those of you that are watching, I was just kind of changing a couple of the things in here because I wanted to show you how how we build up a database of records in here, and we can use that to interpret different things. So what I've done is I've saved a couple of models now, but just to show everyone, let me zoom back in so that I'm maximizing the space on the screen. Once I've filled this in, I click this little save button here, and it will come up with a message saying save as new cost model. And I appreciate that last week we just needed to issue a fix for this, but if I click yes, it tells me that the cost model was saved and it's got a toolkit reference number here. That is just something that the internal workings of the spreadsheet uses. It doesn't relate or bear any relation to your kind of identifiers and things you've put in. Okay. Once I've done that, you can see that all of the information is still retained there. I can clear it. So if I click clear, it'll ask me if I want to clear it. It does give me a warning to say, make sure you save your work before proceeding. I'm going to click no, and it'll tell me the fields aren't cleared. I can also check this button up here that says clear after save. So if I check that, and let me just make some changes to this as well so that we know that this is a different model. And let's take the as well. It doesn't really matter what I'm changing and why. If I click save now, and it will come up with this clear model. So it will ask me after I've saved automatically, do I want to clear it? So if I click yes, say all fields cleared, it's saved it as reference number 4, and you can see that all of the fields have gone now. So I'm working from a completely blank sheet again. You can see that my save button, because it's blank, has gone grey. So if I click it, it'll tell me you need to check the mandatory fields and check that the model doesn't return 0, because if we've got 0 cost, it's meaningless. So if I click OK on that, what it does is it highlights for me what we've got mandatory fields in here. So we need to fill in these at least in order to save it. So I won't bother doing that again, but this just shows you what you need to fill in. Again, we've done a fix where it did say out of area, but of course, because you might not always have out of area, you don't have to fill that in. It worked before, but we've just taken the little highlight off the box so that it doesn't show you that it's a mandatory field anymore. So that's just something to help you, little aids in the model to show you what's happening. If I go into the next page down, logically, which is view models, what you can see here, if I just zoom in, is tells me here that it's got Bob's SL plan 2024. This was the first one that I saved, and it's got some information here. It's also got the breakdown and a little graph. In terms of, we had a question about, can you extract this information? You can highlight this and you can copy it, you can paste it into other sheets. So if you want to copy and paste this information, there's a table down at the bottom. You can see these are all of the toolkits that I've just saved in the model now. So you can save all of these and copy them out and paste them wherever you want if you want to have a look at them in different ways. These are my 4 records that are in the model. If I click a different one, it will come up with the information here. So this is just a really quick way of viewing all of the different records that you've got in the model. So you know, I can click different ones and it'll come up there. There's a little bit to hide if you want to hide that and you just want to go down just to look at the top level information. Right, that's the one I'm looking for. Great. I found it. I just want to look at the detail of that now. Okay. I've only got 4 models in here, so it doesn't really matter, but there's a couple of bits here that you can change the sort order of it, so you can filter and search it a little bit easier. But with regards to this, let's say I want to edit this now. I want to make a change to it. So providers, I've had a conversation with the provider. I want to change the costs. This model that I've got selected, I can click edit, and it will tell me, do you want to override the current form and load this cost model? So if I click yes, it'll tell me that it's been loaded, and you can see now in my add change model, this is the form that I just filled in. Okay, so it's brought all of that information back, so I can now make changes to this. I can do one of two things. I can save this as a new model. So if I click save, it'll save it as a new model. I won't do that. Or I can overwrite it. So you can see that there's an overwrite button here now. So it tells me that Toolkit Ref 5, that's just for information. If I click overwrite, in fact, let me just make some changes. I'll just change. I'll put Arc 2. Okay. So if I click overwrite, and then it'll just ask me, do you want to do that? Click yes. It's asked me for the clear because my little clear box is checked. I'm going to go no. What that's done is that's changed the model that was in there now. So down here, number 4, I've got Arc 2 is the author rather than John Arc, which is what I had before. So you can see that it's updated the model, so you can save new models, you can edit them as you wish. The next sheet that I just want to show you is the dashboard. So again, this is a very similar view to the one that we had last time, except on this one, it just gives us some information about what we've got saved in the toolkit. So it tells me I've got 4 records in here. The lowest unit cost is £20.67, and it tells me there's one model with that cost, and it's this flower cart, Bob's SL plan. And the highest unit cost is £22.20, and I can see that there's one model, it's Bees Knees Supported Living. Okay. Tells me the average hourly rate for the models. So again, if you're using this to say, I want to benchmark all of my providers or all of my specialist placements or all of this, that, and the other, you can use this to say, what's the, excuse me, what's the average? Excuse me. I've also got lowest and highest direct support hours. So in terms of one-to-one support hours, you can have a look at that. It tells me this time there are 3 models with that number of support hours in them, because that's what it's finding. And it's just picked the first one in the list there to give you an example. And again, the highest is Bees Knees. So I can see that the highest unit cost is also the one with the highest number of direct support hours in here, just for information. And then it also expresses that same thing as weekly spend, lowest, highest, and average weekly spend. So these are 3 key metrics that we think when it comes to looking at your market and understanding trends and understanding costs. These are the 3 things that we would typically look at if we're supporting councils or doing any training or coaching, is what's the unit cost, what's the hourly support, what's the volume of support, and what's the total spend. Those 3 things are the things that at a glance are going to give us some insight into what questions we need to ask when we're looking at cost, value for money, that kind of stuff. And then it just gives you a breakdown of the cost. So it breaks down the effective hourly rate and each of the elements of that cost here underneath. And it tells you what category. So if you've got a special category like LD, mental health, against it, you can have a look at that. If we go to benchmarking, this is the bit where we get to choose different models to have a look at here. So I might not want to look at the whole all of my records or the whole database at once. I might want to just look at a few different models at a time. Okay, so what I can do here is you can see this big blank table here. The green row at the top is a little drop down. So if I click in the first one, you can see that I've got some models here. So it's got Bob's SL plan, Betty's SL plan, and other provider. Okay, so if I click Bob's SL plan, it comes up with that model's details. So it comes up with the hours and the breakdown of the hourly rate. Let's say I want to compare that with and other provider. Okay, so I can now see the differences. I can kind of interrogate per cost line where the differences are. So I can see on here that the reason why and other provider is expensive is not to do with the direct hours, not to do with the background hours, because I'm actually getting less background hours in and other provider, but it's actually to do with the things like ancillary. Obviously that drives some slight changes in those, but I can see that ancillary and admin staff is more expensive. I can see that management staff is more expensive. I can see that care overheads, all of these cost lines are more expensive. So I need to look at some. So it just so happens that I know why. It's because I changed the void cost. So I'm covering a void cost in this one because that was the only thing that I changed on the model when I saved it. So I know why the difference occurs in this one. It's about a void cost, but it helps you identify, why different costs might occur. Again, if we put Betty's on there just to complete that, again, we can do the comparison on there. What we've got at the bottom here is a unit cost rank and a support volume rank. So all this does is it just ranks from 1 being the highest, I think, if we hover over it, sorted lowest 1 to highest. So lowest is 1 and lowest is 1 on the volume as well. Okay, so number 1 is the lowest unit cost and number 1 is the lowest support volume, but it ranks them against lowest to highest unit cost and lowest to highest support volume. So you can see here that Bob's SL plan has the lowest unit cost, but it actually has a volume rank of 3, so it's got the highest support volume. Okay, so I know that that's probably going to be, in terms of weekly cost, a more expensive provider because I've got more volume going into it, compared to the other two where the unit cost is slightly more expensive, but the volume is lower. Okay, so I've got less hours going in there. There's no exact kind of science or specific formula to be able to say what's the most cost-effective support solution because we've got too many variables there. But what we've tried to do in this benchmarking tab is give you some flexibility to say, right, what looks like high cost, what looks like high volume, what looks like low cost, what looks like low volume, so that we get a sense of when we're comparing and contrasting different providers. You could use this if you're going out, let's say you've asked for 2 different providers to provide you a cost for a placement. You could use this for that and compare them on that if you wanted to as well, but you can do it for hopefully all sorts of different things there. And then again, you've just got a chart at the bottom that shows the exact same thing essentially, just in a more visual way. Okay. The templates, we encourage people to, if they want to send this out and let providers fill something in, they can fill it in on the templates. But again, we were only funded to provide the model, to provide all the database functionality. We haven't built anything in yet to be able to say, can you click a button and it will transport this cost from this spreadsheet to that spreadsheet? Unfortunately, that's just not there. But you've got a template there if you want to send that out to people, because you can just send that out to people and say, fill that template in, and then when you get it back, you can transpose that back into your form.
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you'd like to see any more walkthroughs or want to ask us anything specific, please do get in touch using the details on screen. See you soon.